Hi there, I'm Patti Ogilvie with the Student Loan Help Group, and I'm a senior enrollment counselor here.
And I'm Sam Pettingill with the Student Loan Help Group. I'm also a senior enrollment counselor.
So today we're going to talk about the income-driven repayment forgiveness and public service loan forgiveness and some of the things going on with the CARES Act and the waiver. So Sam's going to start out with us today.
Yeah, there's been a lot of exciting changes announced recently. There's a lot of deadlines coming up people need to be aware of. So Patti, what are the main benefits of the CARES Act that's going on right now?
So there's been quite a few benefits, and they seem to keep constantly changing them and updating them, like you were saying. So when COVID hit in March 2020, they implemented the CARES Act, which was putting anybody who had direct loans into general forbearance and dropping the interest rate to zero. And so what that meant is those people who had direct loans haven't had to make payments since that time. So there's like 30 of those months if it ends as planned. And like I said, zero interest rate. Another benefit to that is those months during the CARES Act, if you're working towards one of the federal forgiveness programs, such as public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness, those months are going to count as if you were making payments. Now, one thing I do want to point out is if somebody has FFEL loans, they were not part of that CARES Act and they've had to make payments that whole time. So I just want to point that out. And then also part of the CARES Act, there's a Fresh Start program that the DOE is going to be implementing. Anybody who's in default currently and in garnishment, for example, they're going to be put back in good standing and they're going to be able to work towards one of the forgiveness programs. And if they were on, in garnishment before the CARES Act went into place, then, and we're in garnishment, then that's also going to be waived. So it's like a fresh start, exactly what the name says. So Sam, when does the CARES Act end and how can borrowers take advantage of this opportunity?
So right now, the CARES Act is scheduled to end August 31st, which as we're sitting here is only about 2 weeks away. At the moment, President Biden has not announced any kind of extension to the CARES Act forbearance. That doesn't mean that it may not happen. We've had a couple that were right down to the wire where, a week before we started repayment, they've announced another extension. President Biden has said that he will make an announcement regarding student loans before the end of the month. The question is that to do with the extension of the CARES Act, or is that potentially to do with some kind of forgiveness, or even just changes to existing programs yet again? So right now it's set to end August 31st. If that does happen, then people will start going back into repayment in September, most likely. As far as things that they could do in order to take advantage of the opportunity while it lasts, one of the main ones would be getting into an income-driven repayment plan if you're not in one already, because obviously if payments are going to start in 2 weeks, you want it to be the lowest possible payment and not potentially one of those scary outsized standard payments. The other thing, of course, would be getting on track for a forgiveness program if you aren't already, like public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness. The sooner you do that, the sooner you're going to be able to make sure that those months count for you.
Right, exactly.
While we're on the subject of talking about forgiveness, is there a cap, Patti, on how much debt can be forgiven?
No, that's the beauty of it. So with public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness, whatever balance is left, principal and interest, that's the amount that's going to be forgiven. So whether that balance is 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever that balance is, as long as it was set up correctly and kept up with, which is really important, then when they hit that last qualifying payment, then their balance is going to be forgiven once everything's been audited by the Department of Education. So Sam, with the limited public service loan forgiveness waiver, which requirements are waived until October 31st? And then what is the limited waiver?
So the limited waiver is a program the Department of Education announced last year. It came out on October 6th of 2021. And the way I like to think of it, it's almost like creating a grace period. It's the Department of Education saying, we realize we did a terrible job of explaining the requirements for PSLF. People were confused. They didn't meet the requirements, even though they were in public service. So we're leaving the door open for a period of time so that you're able to get on track, and we'll just act as if you were on track the entire time. So what the limited waiver does, as long as your loans are consolidated into direct loans by October 31st of 2022, and you've gotten all of your employment certification paperwork done to show that you've been working for a qualifying employer, any period in repayment on your student loans after the period when public service loan forgiveness began, that's October 1st of 2007, will be able to count as long as you were working for a qualifying employer. So if your loans were in a repayment status, regardless of whether a payment was actually made, whether the payment was late or maybe a partial payment, that will still count as if you actually made the payment in full and on time. Additionally, normally when you consolidate your student loans, that resets your progress toward public service loan forgiveness. Whether your loans were FFEL or direct before you consolidated them, consolidating resets that clock toward 120 payments and will take you back to zero. Now, with the limited waiver, no matter how many consolidations you've had in your past, as long as you're done consolidating by October 31st, they will not reset your progress. If you consolidated in, say, 2006 and then again in 2015 and again this year, you would still be treated as if your loans were one unbroken history and you wouldn't lose any of those payments. You also would be able to count certain other periods of time where you were not in a repayment status. So the Department of Education, as part of the limited waiver, they announced an update in April of this year that they will be doing a one-time account adjustment this fall. They said no sooner than the end of the year, so probably sometime in December. They will be making a one-time adjustment to cover two different periods of time. If you were in deferment on your student loans prior to January of 2013, that time will count as if you were in repayment. The only exception there is if you were in an actual in-school status. If your loans say in school, that time won't count. But if you were in deferment, that time will count as long as you had a qualifying employer. And then also any periods of forbearance that were in excess of the Department of Education's guidelines. If you had more than 12 months in consecutive forbearance or more than 36 months of cumulative forbearance over the time that you were in your loans, that time will also count as qualifying time as if you were making payments, again, as long as you were working with a qualifying employer. So they really are going to give credit, not just for some of the times where you might have made payments but not had everything set up correctly, but they're also going to be giving credit for times where you may not have been making payments. If you were in, say, an economic hardship deferment, or if you were in a deferment because you were back in school, again, as long as it was before those dates.
No.
And also it will count regardless of the repayment plan that you were in too.
Oh, that's great. One thing I did want to mention, the people that I've talked to oftentimes are telling me, you know, I've tried to take advantage of the waiver, but I was denied. I think what they don't realize is that the steps have to be done in a proper order. Otherwise, they're going to be denied. And so if you don't do it according to the way that the steps need to be laid out, then you will be denied. So definitely, I would urge everybody to not just assume that they're not eligible, because it could be as simple as they didn't do it in the right order, right? Do you agree?
Yes. And even for people who say, you know what, I don't think I've made 120 payments on my loans, I don't think this applies to me. With those changes, it's very likely that you may have way more qualifying payments than you think.
Yeah, just the people that we've worked with since October 6th who have benefited from the waiver. I don't know the exact number in the amount of forgiveness that we've gotten for people, but I know it's over $30 million just with this waiver alone. So that's pretty incredible.
Absolutely. So while we're talking about public service loan forgiveness, Patti, what counts as a qualifying employer for public service loan forgiveness?
So what a lot of people think is that they have to be a teacher at a school to be eligible for this program. And so that's not true. For public service loan forgiveness, any employer that you work for that's considered a state, local, county, federal government employer or 501c3 nonprofit, as long as you work 30 or more hours a week and you're considered full-time, that counts as a qualifying employer, regardless of what your position. I always like to use the analogy, if I was a cafeteria worker at the hospital here in my county, I'd be eligible as long as I was working more than 30 hours a week. So a lot of people definitely don't grasp that because they think they have to be at a school, and that's not true.
Yes, that's true. And I spoke with someone last year, actually, that was a groundskeeper for a school district in Colorado. And that's qualifying employment. You don't have to be performing a specific job.
I know, it's pretty incredible. Now, Sam, I know there are some other new federal program adjustments. What are some of those?
So there have been some adjustments that have been announced to income-driven repayment forgiveness as well as public service loan forgiveness. Many of those adjustments that I mentioned related to the one-time change that will be happening toward the end of this year, this fall, will also apply to income-driven repayment forgiveness and not just public service loan forgiveness. So for people who have never had a public service position, you actually may still be in a great position for forgiveness. For example, time before consolidation, if you're working toward income-driven repayment forgiveness, time before consolidation will still count, just as it will for PSLF. So if you consolidated your loans back in 2010, that normally would have reset your progress. Now it will not. Also, deferment and forbearance changes, the same changes that I mentioned will also be in effect for IDRF. So if you had deferment before 2013, or if you had forbearances that were in excess of 12 months consecutively or 36 months cumulatively, that time will count toward your necessary payments for IDRF. IDRF is normally 240 qualifying payments, although for some payment plans, it can be as high as 300. So that will count toward those times. In addition, any borrower that has loans that have accumulated time in repayment of at least 20 to 25 years will see automatic forgiveness, regardless of if they are currently on an income-driven repayment plan. That's pretty exciting. Even the time, if you're currently on an IDR, the time when you have not been on an income-driven repayment plan will be counted as if you were in an income-driven repayment plan. And again, late and partial payments will still count. Also, it is important to note with those changes for IDRF, if you have commercially held FFEL loans, that would be the type of loans that are still in repayment right now that were never covered by the CARES Act. If you've been in repayment these last 2 years, those changes for income-driven repayment forgiveness will not qualify, will not count for you unless you have consolidated your loans by the time the account adjustment takes place this fall. So it's very important that if you weren't covered by the CARES Act forbearance, you reach out right away and make sure that you're in the right position, because most likely you will need to consolidate your loans by this fall to qualify.
Right.
And then, Patti, with all of these changes, I mean, there's so much going on. How can borrowers stay updated on all of the changes?
So there are a couple ways. First off, they can be working with us. We're always up on all the legislation. They can log into their servicer site and make sure that they're looking at their inbox. They can go to our website, www.tslhg.com, and we are always posting updates on there, our Twitter, our Facebook. Also, they can log into studentaid.gov and read the announcements there. But quite honestly, they're not kept up to date, and usually I can't ever find anything there. So I would say the best way is to keep in touch with us one way or another, because we are always up to date on everything that's going on. What do you think? Do you think there's any other way that they should stay in touch?
No, and I think the other thing that's important to note is with us, I mean, we're keeping track of those changes for them, and we're doing the work necessary too. So for example, when the limited waiver came out, a lot of our prior clients, we hadn't needed to collect, information on their employment going back to 2007 because it didn't matter. Right. And now when it suddenly did matter, we went back and did all of that extra work to make sure that all of our clients qualified for the full benefit of the waiver.
Because too, if there's any changes and we're working with them, we're always going to get whatever forgiveness they're entitled to and whatever needs to be done with any program changes. So we've always got their back. So that is ideally the best way to know exactly what options you have.
Absolutely.
So Sam, I don't have anything more to go over about this. How about you? You have anything else that you want to point out to everybody?
Just that if you've been on the fence and you've been procrastinating about dealing with your student loans, I know how that is. I've been there. This is really the time to do it, because with that waiver ending in about 2 months, it's really getting to be crunch time that you need to get on track now.
Because the DOE is moving very, very slowly, and each step of the way, like I said, it's a multi-step process. It's taking them a long time to complete it. So if you're, like Sam said, on the fence, just reach out to us, have a consultation, and if you're not going to benefit, it's not going to hurt you. But if you are going to benefit and you don't do something, then you will be kicking yourself, because this, at least the first process in the step, has to be done before that waiver ends. And it's not like a week before you can just say, hey, go ahead and set me up. It's not going to be that easy.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, you guys, thanks for watching and listening, and keep up to date with us, and we'll give you some more info the next time around. Hope you all enjoy your day.
Have a great day.